Hey, you! Yeah, you! Have you ever seen a movie before? Have you ever seen a movie so good you wanted to make a religion out of it? If so, that's kind of weird actually, but I have great news. There's some people with a documentary called A Clockwork Shining on Amazon Prime that has done exactly that.
There are many theories as to what The Shining is really about, from the faking of the moon landing to Native American genocide and the Holocaust. While those topics are very important, we believe that there's something even more sinister lurking beneath the surface of this masterful film.
You know you're getting into something special when the first person to talk goes, "Hey, have you ever heard of genocide? It's pretty bad, isn't it? But guess what? There's something way worse than that, and it's being revealed in a movie about an alcoholic attacking his family."
Many others have studied the Shining film for many years and have already pointed out things that just don't add up.
There are several continuity errors in the movie which are really kind of unexplainable. And it's kind of curious because Kubrick was known as a man who paid attention to detail. So why are there these gigantic continuity errors in this movie?
To any normal person, mistakes are just that. The more complicated a project becomes, the more mistakes that are probably going to be made. But to somebody who's terminally conspiracy-brained, the exact opposite is true. Since Kubrick is so thorough, he can't make any mistakes whatsoever. He must be perfect in his execution of his films, and anything that seems like a mistake is merely just a message spotted by these incredible sleuths. But is it really? Because they don't actually explain any of this stuff. They just point to it with arrows and say, isn't that suspicious?
In that end scene, the very end of the movie, when Kubrick fades the shot of the picture on the wall, just for a split second, you can see a tiny Hitler mustache beginning to form on Jack's face, which is very interesting because the date on the picture says July 4th, 1921. Adolf Hitler rose to power within the National Socialist German Party, commonly referred to as the Nazi Party, in July of 1921.
This, for the uninitiated, is some top-notch detective work. After all, why would people be having a dress party on July 4th in America? It must be something to do with Hitler.
There are TVs in The Shining that are going, but they're not plugged into anything. There's Beatles Abbey Road symbolism in the movie, and we can't forget that the manager of the hotel, Ullman, looks a hell of a lot like JFK.
And this site was chosen for its seclusion and scenic beauty.
Designed it to be a movie that would take you a long time to really unlock what was going on.
Whoa, dude, the TVs are on and there's no cords. Oh my gosh, Stanley Kubrick is a genius.
And one thing that people really don't notice, that doesn't really make a lot of sense, which is when Halloran calls the police station from Florida, the police act as if they didn't even know anyone was up at the hotel. Which is really strange because Wendy had already called the police before, earlier in the movie.
Wouldn't it be weird if our self-appointed Kubrick experts are wrong? Wouldn't it be strange if what they just described is not what actually happened in the movie? Turns out when Halloran calls the Forest Service, they don't act like they've never heard from Wendy. They just say, yeah, we'll look into it. That's it. That's the scene. Conveniently, they didn't include that in the documentary, but I'm going to.
But there's a family up there all by themselves with a young kid. And with this storm and everything, I'd sure appreciate it if you'd give them a call on your radio just to see if everything's okay.
I'll be glad to do that, sir. Why don't you call me back in about 20 minutes?
Thank you very much. I'll do that.
All right, sir.
There's a lot of sexual innuendo in The Shining, both sexual tension between Danny and Jack.
Whoa, hold on, hold the phone, wait a second.
So Wendy and Danny are watching TV, and in the background, in the corner, there's a fire truck and a teddy bear, and the fire truck has a ladder sticking up, and it is giving the appearance that the teddy bear has a heart on it.
Oh my lord.
The Shining is Kubrick's 11th film, and there's 11s all through the film. There's the Apollo 11 shirt, the lights on the walls look like 11s. 11 is a special number in occult theology.
Oh my god, 11s are all over this movie. It points to one example and then a bunch of like non-examples of that. Like there's two girls, there's some lights that don't look like 11s. If you got some 11s, bro, whip them out. Okay, I don't want to say that considering what we just went through with this guy a second ago.
The Shining is actually Stanley Kubrick's confession to doing the moon landings. And I give pretty good evidence for that. Now, if he did fake the Apollo moon landing, then he probably has really deep connections into the intelligence world.
2001: A Space Odyssey is one of the greatest films ever made. It changed sci-fi forever and brought it mass appeal that it had never had before. It's a legendary movie and it deserves to be. It's one of my favorite movies. It's one of my wife's favorite movies. We quote it all the time in this house. But after you watch this, I want you to go and watch a clip of 2001 and compare and contrast that to the Apollo missions. You'll notice a very big difference. Namely, 2001 is just a movie. The astronaut stuff, that happened in real life. You can tell there's a huge difference.
It's been said that Kubrick was an atheist and that he didn't believe in the paranormal or the supernatural, which might have been influence for him to create a movie that is not depicting ghosts or apparitions, but people acting as ghosts, as an experiment ran at the Overlook, and as a part of an experiment within the film, and also an experiment on the audience.
It is a very strange take to suggest that nothing supernatural is happening in a movie where characters communicate using psychic powers. That is not a thing that happens in the actual natural world, so it is supernatural by definition.
It may be that Kubrick was forced to take The Shining by Warner Brothers.
All the way through this documentary, you hear the same claim over and over. Kubrick didn't want to do The Shining, and this somehow backs up our completely insane ideas, but that's wrong. Stanley Kubrick was actually pretty stoked to do The Shining. He just wasn't the biggest fan of Stephen King's writing, which is understandable, to say the least.
The Shining has been regarded as one of the greatest horror films ever made. But is it really a horror film?
I would not really call it a horror film because so many things have been left open to interpretation.
I feel like these guys aren't the biggest horror fans, so upon encountering a movie like The Shining, which is different than you would expect of the genre if you only know of slasher films, they're like, oh, since I like this, it must not be horror. Horror is bad. But actually, horror can be good and deep. The Shining is just one example, but there are others, like Jacob's Ladder, another one of my favorite movies. But yes, it is a horror movie. You could add psychological to it, you could add thriller to it, but it is, at its core, a horror movie.
The Shining is very unique in the way that nothing supernatural or paranormal really happens in the entire film, with the exception of the ball rolling toward Danny before he goes into room 237 where he is assaulted by a woman.
Yeah, you plebeians just don't understand that there's nothing supernatural in this movie except for the zombie woman in room 237 throwing the ball to Danny. Other than that, there's nothing supernatural about it.
The first time that we meet Wendy and Danny in The Shining, they're both wearing red, white, and blue. And Wendy is reading a book by an intelligence officer named J.D. Salinger called Catcher in the Rye.
If you were going to make any connection to the red, white, and blue thing, I think the best one is, that picture from earlier taken on July 4th. But also, I think any high school student can attest that The Catcher in the Rye is the real horror of this movie. I wouldn't read that book again if you paid me.
I'm a former club and radio DJ turned author, researcher, broadcaster, and public speaker. And these days, I look into the true nature of the music industry and entertainment and popular culture generally, and what it's really used for. And unfortunately, it's not all about fun and entertainment. There are other agendas at play.
Those last couple guys, while they were quite crazy indeed, were nothing compared to this guy. This guy is fucking insane. This guy is full-on Satanic Panic. Everything is Illuminati, 666, Freemason, all that good stuff, and it is a wild ride.
Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger is a book which has been identified as a trigger in MK Ultra-style mind control programming.
This documentary mostly concerns a US government program called MK Ultra. MKUltra, if you didn't know, was a government program to achieve mind control. It was remarkably unsuccessful. It was a total failure, wasted a lot of time and money, but at least people got to do some LSD, which wasn't that fun for one guy because he jumped out of a window. Anyway, so the documentary is largely about that, and just keep in mind, it's all a bunch of nonsense. Look around, we never needed the government to brainwash us, we do that ourselves plenty well enough.
So, Mark Chapman was found reading a copy of this book on the scene of the John Lennon murder. Only a few weeks later, John Hinckley Jr., who's the guy who attempted to assassinate Ronald Reagan, was also found with a copy of Catcher in the Rye.
Conspiracy theorists have very interesting pattern-making connections in their brains. They take the most simple facts and somehow get to the most deranged conclusions you'll ever hear in your life. Two crazy people try to assassinate very famous people. They're both caught with the Catcher in the Rye, therefore the Catcher in the Rye is part of a secret government experiment to have people kill through mind control. Okay, well, let's just never mind the fact that The Catcher in the Rye is one of the most popular books of all time. Never mind that everybody has to read it pretty much mandatorily in schools. Never mind the fact that it is the edgelord's dream. It had to be the CIA for reasons.
Hinckley ticks all the boxes for having been a programmed assassin in the same way as Chapman, and The Catcher in the Rye just keeps cropping up as one of these books which seems to have been used in programming of this nature.
I hate to sound like some kind of a government shill, but where is the evidence for this? How did you come to those conclusions? This man is stating these things as facts, but where are the facts? Where did you get this information from? Let us see it. There's basically no way to find out. You can't find out anything about this guy online. Maybe he's the psyop.
Are they setting up Jack in The Shining to be a mind-controlled assassin?
Okay, so that just seems like a really bad plan. The place already has a reputation as a place that has caused people to kill other people in bouts of cabin fever. It already has that reputation. This is not the best plan if you want your guy to make it out alive and not in cuffs. If you want your guy to be useful as a mind-controlled whatever, then maybe don't put him in that situation in particular. I'm sure you can pick a better one for the training.
It makes sense if he's making a multi-layered movie that one of those story layers is going to be about his experiences with the intelligence world, including MKUltra.
I feel like I shouldn't have to state this, but I guess I'm going to have to state it just for the record. Kubrick was not involved with MKUltra. He had nothing to do with it.
Well, in the mid to late 1960s, you had so many of the musicians who would come to populate the so-called counterculture scene, which was the hippie flower power culture of the time, and why it was that bands and musicians from all over the United States were getting drawn magnet-like to Laurel Canyon. The interesting thing about it is that that neighborhood had no musical heritage whatsoever up to that point.
Laurel Canyon is a huge focus of this documentary because a lot of famous bands ended up congregating there or otherwise coming from that scene. But the thing is, it was near Los Angeles, within easy driving distance, and it was a lot cheaper than the surrounding communities, so it seems kind of like an obvious place for rising artists to hang out. That's always been the case, though. If you look back at the history of pretty much any music genre, it's always been random towns where people are like, oh, I like it here. It's cheap, it's neat, there's a lot of artists, and a bunch more artists move in. It happened to Portland recently, it's happened to Austin in the past, it's happened to Asheville, North Carolina, it's happened to various places in New York City. It happens all the time. There's nothing really special about it except that more good music than usual came out of that scene.
And they all went on to become the most prominent, influential bands and groups in that counterculture scene. So they were changing cultural attitudes among young people, largely through music. Also through things like drugs and other societal changes that were happening, but mainly through music. And all of this was happening in this one obscure neighborhood.
The implication going forward is that this place was a hotbed of MKUltra-esque activity, and all of these bands were controlled opposition. Now, why the government would want to support a rising movement of children that don't obey their parents, do drugs, and are for peace instead of the wars ongoing in the world, including the Cold War, is beyond me. Why would the government, why would the CIA want to create these movements that embraced socialist ideology and communist ideology and anarchist ideology? Not universally, but there were plenty of them. Why would the government want to create that exactly?
The fathers of these important musicians had direct connections into the world of the military. It might be the Army, the Navy, the Marines, it might be the Pentagon, the Defense Department, different aspects of government, different expressions of the establishment in terms of bloodline aristocratic families, secret societies like the Freemasons, Bohemian Grove, the Century Club, Harvard and Yale universities, Ivy League universities, and these were all pretty unlikely professions for the fathers of rock stars to have.
Let's do a thought exercise here and try to make sense out of all of this, because they are correct. There were a lot of military brats involved in this music. So how did that happen exactly? Well, let's go back in time a little bit. Let's say it's 1970. What famous event happened about 25 to 30 years before 1970? Oh, a world war where almost everyone was involved in some capacity, and the people who survived that war, in America at least, were able to go to prestigious universities, where of course they could join prestigious clubs like the Freemasons. It's not that special, it's not that odd. There are plenty of stories about that even from my own family, and my family isn't exactly high class. My mom's a teacher and my dad's a coal miner, but yet they have the same sorts of stories.
You would never find any working class professions. So there were no dockers, labourers, no lorry drivers, no plumbers, no electricians, but plenty of generals, admirals, politicians. A regular mainstream mind might chalk that up as just one of those things, just coincidence. But when you've been in this business as long as I have, and you've researched as much stuff as I have, you realise that there's no such thing as coincidences like that.
Yeah, it's not like there were any working class people in the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or the Animals or Creedence Clearwater Revival or the Yardbirds or...
George Stephen Morrison is probably the best example we have of one of these prominent musicians coming out of Laurel Canyon having high-ranking connections into the military. So he was a Navy admiral, and he was in charge of the fleet of ships involved in the Gulf of Tonkin false flag event, which was used to justify the escalation of America in the Vietnam War.
Wow, that's crazy. So why was Jim Morrison so vehemently anti-war? Why was Jim Morrison against the Vietnam War loudly, publicly, openly? What did MK Ultra stand to gain from creating an anti-war movement instead of a movement to support the wars they were in?
So we have to conclude from this, faced with the evidence, that Jim Morrison was an actor. And when he was out on stage as the frontman of The Doors, shirtless, exposing himself on stage, doing drugs, performing drunk, it was all an act. A couple of years before that, we can find an ad of a young, clean-cut, scholarly-looking Jim Morrison doing a commercial for the University of Florida. And then he got the gig with The Doors, grew his hair out, and started rocking a different look. They were both acting jobs.
Breaking news, everyone. Area man who claims to have been involved in music for decades has just now discovered bands perform on stage, that they're not really like that all the time, that they take on certain roles and characteristics and personas that are different from their normal ones because they're putting on a show.
I personally suspect that Jim Morrison's death, as it was reported to us in 1971 at the age of 27, was faked. And from many of the things that I've seen, I suspect that this is the case with many artists who have had family ties to the intelligence communities. When we're told they've died, we shouldn't necessarily assume that that's the case.
Yeah, he really said all that stuff just now. It's like the QAnon people, how they think nobody ever dies. Everyone's just faking their own deaths. They're being replaced by clones. They're replacing other people as actors. The other people are replacing them. whatever else, just the most deranged, delusional stuff you've ever heard. And somehow the deep state, with all their elite intelligence, just cannot figure it out, cannot crack the code, cannot understand it. But like the dumbest person from your high school that barely graduated and never left their hometown, they got it. They figured it all out. They're on the plan.
In the beginning of the film, Ullman mentions to Jack that the people in Denver recommended Jack very highly.
Like, who are these people in Denver? Why are they directing a hotel that's out in the middle of nowhere sitting on top of a mountain that's closed half the year?
The people in Denver are mentioned several times in this interaction between Ullman and Jack.
I know that these guys aren't like the most connected with reality, like at all, but there are things like temp agencies that will let people travel for work. There are organizations that hire for their different properties out of state. It makes sense that if there's a mountain resort that's an owned subsidiary of some company, it's going to be hiring from like somewhere else because there probably aren't enough people in that area to staff it or who like want to. They probably have better things to do with their lives, so they hire people from the outside. There's not really much to it. The people in Denver, they're a temp agency or a hiring agency or something. It's something boring, but they got to make it into something really special because these are some very special boys with very special thoughts.
Many people have noticed that the hotel manager, Ullman, looks a lot like JFK. What people don't realize is that many of the people that worked with Kubrick also worked with Kennedy.
Personally, I don't really see that much of a resemblance, but I tell you what I do see a resemblance to. Like every other man in the 70s, because they all had the same hairstyles, they all looked like that. Pretty much every man that I know that was alive in the 70s had that exact same haircut at some point. They all looked like that.
Isn't it a coincidence that the Air Force had a studio called Lookout Mountain, and the hotel in Stanley Kubrick's The Shining is called the Overlook? Lookout, Overlook.
I'm not even sure what the coincidence there is, because overlook and lookout are two very different words. Like, they have in common look in them. Overlook, it's kind of like you look over something. Look out means you're kind of like looking around. They're not like even that similar, aside from both are about looking at things.
Kubrick lived on and off in Los Angeles from the early 1940s until the mid-1960s. So it's very likely that he knew about the secret Air Force movie studio up on Laurel Canyon. That would explain the weird coincidence of how the Lookout Mountain Hotel looks a lot like the Overlook Hotel in The Shining.
I think dude needs new glasses because those buildings don't look anything alike. I mean, they look like typical buildings you'd find on top of a mountain or hill, but that's about it. Like, there's even less in common between the two than Overlook and Lookout, which are already different enough.
When the Air Force saw the inside of the set of the B-52 in the movie, they thought that Stanley had gotten some kind of secret information because he had built it so accurately to the T of what an inside of a B-52 looked like. This alarmed the Air Force so much that they actually came and visited Stanley in 1963. This probably was the opening door to Stanley's entrance into the intelligence community.
Yeah, it's always a really good sign when, like, the CIA shows up at your door with questions. That's always a really good sign that ends well for people.
This is a June 4th, 1965 document from the U.S. Information Agency. It is addressed to the President of the United States. The memo recommends hiring 4 known directors of films. They are being recommended for some unknown project, with Stanley Kubrick being recommended as most promising.
We really don't know what these famous film directors were being recruited for, what project or whatever. Was it the moon landing?
So I looked up this document myself, and I don't know whether they're lying here or whether they just like didn't do enough research, but the document is available and we know exactly what it was about. There was an expo happening and America was going to be doing some films at the expo. They wanted to hire a prominent director to do some films, And they ended up not doing that. They did something else for the expo, but Stanley Kubrick was on that list because he was a prominent director at that time with a lot of hype behind him.
I mean, it happened in 1964, so that would be just about the right time that they would be looking for someone. This is actually the smoking gun proving that Kubrick was working with the government.
Not only is it not a smoking gun, it's not even a gun at all. And by the way, if you're going to do a documentary making all these nefarious claims of this person and that person and the government and whatever else, at least try to get your dates correct, because he said 1964. It was 1965. They showed the document a second ago. At least do some editing. Jesus Christ.
The 2001 was also a way for them to figure out how to fake the moon landing, but it was also a giant advertisement for the aerospace industry and the military-industrial complex, which is probably who funded the movie.
No, we know who funded 2001: A Space Odyssey. It was the studios. It wasn't the defense industry or the aerospace industry, and the movie wasn't an advertisement for the aerospace industry because they couldn't, do all of that stuff, so it wouldn't be a very effective advertisement, but it was a very effective advertisement for IBM.
During the original run of 2001, there was a whole bunch of extra credits at the end of the movie that got removed after the first run. I have a list of those credits. And in those credits, the makers of 2001: A Space Odyssey, Stanley Kubrick, thanked Langley, Virginia, Air Force Intelligence, Naval Intelligence, all of the giant aerospace companies in America. So it's clear that there was this link between the military-industrial complex and 2001: A Space Odyssey.
As far as I can tell, this claim is completely original to that guy, and nobody else in human history has ever made it. No one has ever suggested, aside from this guy, that there was a list of contractors named at the end of any of the runs of 2001. It doesn't exist. It never happened. This guy is lying. There was a document where some companies were mentioned as being helpful in the process of making the movie in terms of guiding their advisors, but that's about it. And that's not really saying much because, yeah, if you're going to make a movie about space, you're going to be going to the best of the best to find out exactly how you should go about that. You want to find out as much as possible to make a movie as good as possible, and that's what they did. Kubrick was not personally involved with the defense industry, and there were no credits along these lines. This guy is lying. He's making stuff up himself that nobody else has ever even claimed. I even found the letter online where these companies are mentioned by an advisor who worked with them.
In movies, you sit down and you write the script, and then you put the script into the production company. They go to the distribution company, they read the script, and then they give money to the production company. And Kubrick must have given Warner Brothers a script for The Shining, but for some reason, all during the shoot, and you can see this very clearly in Vivian Kubrick's film, The Making of The Shining, Kubrick is rewriting the movie.
What was Kubrick doing here? Was he trying to encode a secret meaning into The Shining that he didn't want anyone to know about?
This is like dudes who have no experience with film whatsoever and don't understand anything about the art or the industry, because rewrites during a movie are not that uncommon. It's not considered best practice, but it actually happens pretty frequently on minor movies and major movies alike. It's kind of frowned upon because it can result in increased costs and delays, and generally it's not that good of a thing to do. But usually it's the first draft or second draft that gets the film greenlit, and then there are additional drafts and one is decided on. But rewrites are a thing that have been known to happen all the time. There are any number of really big movies from the last couple decades that have been rewritten multiple times and gotten delayed because of it. We're just lucky that didn't happen with Kubrick, but with the control freak he was, with how meticulous and perfectionistic, can we be surprised he was doing that, trying to make his movie better at the time?
In Eyes Wide Shut, at the beginning, when Nicole Kidman is dancing with the strange Hungarian guy, there's 8 pointed stars on the walls all around them. The 8-pointed star is a Freemasonic symbol of Venus. Venus is, of course, Lucifer. Lucifer is the morning star. in the book of Revelation.
It's amazing how they go into a movie with like explicit occult themes and just like focus on something totally inconsequential. I actually got kind of curious because I know this movie takes place like right around Christmas, and I called my mom, who is very much like anti-Freemason and anti-Illuminati and all that good stuff because she's kind of insane. And I asked her, I said, do you have any pictures from Christmas with like the star on top? And she said, yeah, sure, I can look them up. She loves trips down memory lane. And she did, and there were 8-pointed stars among them. Is my mom evil? Well, possibly, but it has nothing to do with the stars on her trees or like the points on the stars. Anyway, this documentary was really frustrating to watch as a Kubrick fan, and I don't recommend it because it can probably drive almost anyone insane. I feel like I lost a bunch of IQ points from having to constantly fact-check everything. I just regret that there are some people who are going to watch it not like knowing, maybe like very casual fans who just don't know as much as other people about the movie and or the movies and can't spot the nonsense everywhere. But this just goes to show like how religion happens. And if you are religious, I apologize, but this is the exact process by which religion forms. People just make connections between things that aren't there, and eventually it snowballs, and you end up with like bizarro cults that sometimes evolve into bizarro religions. The same thing happened with Mormonism and plenty of others, and sorry if you're Mormon, but that's just how it is, but I don't imagine many Mormons are watching. Anyway, thank you for watching. That is all I've got at the moment. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope that like you didn't feel like you lost a bunch of IQ points following along. There's a lot more than that, but I don't want to do a second video on it. But if this one does well, I just might, just for all of you. Please like, subscribe, comment if you made it this far, and if you didn't, that sucks.